I've cut some tags. These measure 1.5 inches by 4.5 inches for no other reason than I rather like those proportions. And the way that I've made these is I've cut down the rectangles, so this is where I started from with my blank, and then I've taken one of my tags, I've cut the edges off, and I've just used my pencil to mark where those edges are, taken my scissors, snipped off the corners, and then added a hole using a hole punch, and that way all of my tags will be the same size or very, very similar. With these I want to show you a way that you can begin adding depth and texture with some inks and with some stamps. It doesn't matter what stamps you have, as long as you've got one that is larger writing and another stamp which has maybe got smaller writing on it and smaller phrases, because you want to create contrast. This stamp is Impression Obsession, it's L9724, and I use it an awful lot. The inks I'm using are Distress Oxide Antique Linen and Tattered Rose and Smoky Grey, and that's what I'm going to do some of my stamping with. But to begin with, I want to show you how we can create colour on the background of these. Now, use whatever applicator you have. You might have a foam pad, you might have a brush like this. I quite like the brush because it allows me to sweep nicely across the tags. And I'm going to start with my antique linen. I'll use one end of my brush to pick up some ink, and this will be very, very faint, because this isn't about putting on big intense colour. This is about just taking the white away from the tag. I'll do it slightly different on each one. And I'm going to turn my brush around and use the other end for that nice, oops, pinky effect, if I can keep the ink on my desk. So this isn't about adding total coverage, it's just about putting some colour on. There we go. I'm going to ink up my letter stamp with a smoky grey ink. This is an archival ink, and it's smoky grey because that will give us a nice soft colour of lettering, but it won't be too bold. It'll just be something subtle. And I'm just going to press the tag into it. You can see it's just a little hint of lettering in the background. I'm not going to re-ink my stamp. I'm going to try and get my tag on it straight. I'm just going to pick up bits of lettering. Like that. We already have a nice tag base to work on, but I want to add some more contrast. Now this is nice if you want something to be very, very subtle in the background. If you want it to pop a tiny little bit more, I've got a rose red and I've got my smaller word stamp. And this is from a set from 49 Market, and it's called Captured Adventures. I'm not going to add a lot of this, it's just to add contrast and a little pop of colour. And it doesn't have to be added in straight either, you can add it in any way up you like. As you can see, again, I'm not re-inking each time because I just want the impression of the stamp. I'm going to re-ink this bit just so I can make sure I do get something across the top there. And this is why it doesn't matter what your lettering stamps say, because all you're doing is adding a little pop of colour. And this is where I raid the scrap box. So I've got a little piece of some kind of thin fabric, I don't know what it is. I've got a bit of an old neck curtain, and we're going to make these things add texture to our tags. So the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to do the first one with some layers going around the centre. This is the playtime, this is the fun stuff. This is when there's no rules, you do just make it up as you go along and you make it the way you want it to be. And the more you play, the more comfortable you'll become with this, which is why it's a good idea to give yourself a little time and just sit down and fiddle around with what you like and what you don't like and see what makes sense to you. I'm going to use a tape runner. Tape runner is good because it will hold everything in place. It will sort of grab it quite quickly without you having to hold things and wait for wet glue to dry off. Let's see if I can make it grab on the fabric. Yep, got a little bit there. You can see how randomly this is going on. Now there's a couple of things that you can do. You can wrap this lace around the back if there's going to be something on the back of this that will hide the lace, or what I'm going to do is cut it off. But I'm not cutting it hard to the edge of the tag because the whole point of a textured tag is I want it to break up that outside area a little bit. These scraps may look very tiny, but you can use these again. I've got a piece of paper. This is from a book which has been deliberately chosen to be used on tags and journals and things like that. And I'm going to edge it with some tea dye coloured ink using one of my foam applicators. I just want to add a little bit of colour around the outside edge. And that will sit nicely just under the layers there. I've got 3 little tags with the same items on them but just positioned slightly differently. And I've also gone around the outside edge of all my pieces of paper, and I've gone around the outside edge of my tags as well with the Distress Oxide tea dye, because that gives a really nice edging to the tags. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to do this off camera. I'm going to sew little strips, maybe some zigzag stitches into each of these tags, and that again will add texture. Here's a tag then that's got some nice zigzag stitching down one side and the other, and it's easy to show you from the back just how much stitching has gone into that. I've also printed out some of my words. This is a digital download that's available on my Etsy shop, and I will provide a link below the video. And I've added some of the Distress Oxide tea dye around the edges of each of my little cutout words using my foam applicator. And I'm going to stick these down. Because I've not sewn down and stitched down everything, I've left myself plenty of places that I can just tuck little words and phrases. My words are glued down, and now I want to add a little bit of colour. It will depend on how much text you want to add to your tags, what you add on at this stage. If you want them to go into a journal, then you might not want to add anything that's going to add too much bulk to your pages when they're closed. So buttons are a good idea, or also tiny little beads if you've got little seed beads. I've got some red and blue buttons. The red picks up the inked words that we did earlier, and the blue is just a nice contrast. And red and blue, this sort of turquoisey blue, is a combination I'm particularly enjoying at the moment. I've added some thread through the little holes in the buttons, and that again is a way of adding texture but without adding too much dimension or bulk. You can sew these onto your tags if you want, or I found glue is okay, and I like to group them together, so I wouldn't put a button at the top and a button at the bottom. I think they work best when they can be together like friends. 3 little textured tags, and then of course you can add ribbon in the top as you choose. If you like a sort of a nice big bulky tie, but you only have thin thread, don't worry, cut off a nice length of it and fold it in half a couple of times. Thread it through the tag, loop it through, and then if you split the top pieces you can tie a bow and it will look thicker than if you had just used single thread. It's about using up what you have rather than thinking you have to go and buy ribbon or lace or anything special. And that's 3 textured tags.